Good evening, all. Welcome to SAP online classes. So today we have Dr. Rajesh V. Nair, who is Assistant Professor of English, School of Letters under Mahatma Gandhi University. Sir will be handling literary criticism and theory, focusing on Plato. Welcome, sir. So we shall begin the session, sir. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, all of you. Let me begin the session with your permission. Today, the topic of discussion is Plato and his contribution to literary criticism. At the outset, let me introduce the learning objectives of this session. Through this session, I'm going to analyze Plato's contribution to literary criticism. Secondly, I would like to explore how Plato influenced later critics. So, if you analyze the syllabi of many universities, Plato may not be a necessary component in the paper literary criticism. Usually, the literary criticism paper begins with Aristotle's Poetics. So, however, a knowledge of Plato's contribution to literary criticism is very, very important because so Plato is a starting point from which later critics such as Aristotle, Sidney, Dryden, Matthew Arnold, and in between, obviously Dr. Johnson, they made use of his ideas. Some later critics agreed with some views of Plato, whereas some strongly objected to his views. So that's very important. So I will just give you an example. Plato, according to Plato, art is fake. Art represents what we call illusion. So, according to him, truth is the ultimate thing. So, if I take you to 20th century, let's make a comparative analysis. Towards the end of the 20th century, we come across a very, very important thinker, Baudrillard, who introduced the concept simulacra. Okay, so he through that concept simulation or simulacra, Baudrillard, he challenged the very notion of truth, and along with Baudrillard, I am reminded of Lyotard. So one philosopher, one thinker living in who lived in way back in 4th century BC, and another one in 20th century. So how these two thinkers approach truth into different ways. So, when we study Plato, it is always better to make connections, some comparisons with later thinkers. So since we don't have much time, let me introduce the structure of my session. I propose to divide my presentation into 7 different sections. I will begin with a very brief sketch of classical criticism, followed by a brief introduction to Plato, followed by the most important aspect of his criticism, that is his theory of ideas or form. Then Plato's views on poetry, his attack on poetry, different grounds, then followed by his views on drama. Finally, we have to make a critical evaluation of his contribution as a critic. And at the end of the session, we can have a session for discussion. So with your permission, let me begin the first session, that is classical criticism. So when we talk about classical age, so classical age, spans from or spanned from 8th century BC to 4th century BC, and classical age of Greece and Rome, and it was a golden period of art and philosophy, and we had great artists, great writers such as Sophocles, Euripides, etc., Horace. And at the same time, we had great philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. So on the whole, it was a golden period, that is the period from 8th century BC to 4th century BC. But what were the important features of this classical criticism? I take you to neoclassical period. Classical critics such as John Dryden and Alexander Pope, as well as Dr. Johnson, they highlighted the importance of what we call reason and good sense. Though I should admit that Dryden was a liberal neoclassicist. So reason and good sense were very, very important as far as neoclassical writers were concerned, as far as neoclassical critics were concerned. So they borrowed these notions from ancient classical period. So reason, logic, order. So all these attributes, all these aspects were very, very important during the classical period. And, tragedy and epic, two important forms as far as classical masters were concerned. And there is no need to tell you about the contribution of Aristotle in proposing a theory of tragedy, right? So the next session, that is introducing Plato. So in this section, let me quickly introduce some of the important aspects in Plato's life. He was a member of, he was born in an aristocratic family in Athens in 429 BC to 397 BC. So he lived in between, we can say 5th and 4th century BC. And very importantly, I should remind you that he was a member of a ruling class, powerful class, aristocratic class, and the values, the so-called values he propounded, the so-called morals he propounded, were what we call elite class or ruling class morals. And remember, at the time of Plato, there were two sections of people who were treated as secondary citizens. One, slaves, and slaves, the condition of slaves, we can expect they had a horrible time in ancient Greece. And women, secondly, women, interestingly, women were also considered as secondary citizens. So both slaves and women were considered on par with each other. And, it was essentially an ultra patriarchal society. So whatever ideas Plato introduced through his writings were essentially, elite ideas, from the standpoint of a spokesman of patriarchy. It's very important. And Plato, he started an institution, academy, and he was a very important figure, the heart and soul of that academy for almost 40 years. And we all know that Plato was a disciple of the great philosopher, the wisest man ever lived, according to the oracle of Delphi. So it was a student of Socrates, and at the same time, Aristotle was a student of Plato. So Plato taught Aristotle. Okay, looking at some of the important works of Plato, and we know that Republic is his masterpiece. Aeon is very important because in this work he talks about the poets, and I quote him: "Poets are divinely inspired. Poets are divinely inspired." So he spoke about art. He spoke against art. He spoke against poets, but according to him, it was a divine, vocation, right? Quite interesting. Symposium, another important work, dialogues, Phaedrus, Cratylus, etc., etc. And uh, the next point is, during Plato's period, we can see the decline of the glory of Athens. Athens used to be the seat of culture. Athens used to be the center of civilization, art, etc., etc. But unfortunately, during the time of Plato, he could see the slow and steady decline of Athens, and he was deeply hurt by the trend. So he was totally shocked regarding the social, what we call, degeneration of his times, and that's why he thought about the ways in improving the society. And here comes a very important point, that is, according to Plato, philosophers they have the major role. Only philosophers can save society. So he preferred philosophy over other branches of learning, and he was totally against art. Right? So philosophers can lead people to, uh, you know, the life of culture, uh, to a life of a decorum, etc. Right. And here it's very important for us to remember his idea of a social well-being. So, what is Plato's idea of social well-being? According to Plato, citizens in his republic, the ideal uh, society envisaged by Plato, according to him, citizens, they have to get strict training and discipline. They have to be disciplined. They have to be trained to become ideal citizens, and they have to be productive. It's very, very important. Citizens have to be very productive and law abiding. So they have to obey the laws. They have to obey the rules of the land. So if you take the first part, that is citizens, they have to be productive. So throughout his writings, you can see Plato gave so much importance to utility. That's why we call him a utilitarian philosopher. So citizens, they have to be productive. So they have to be useful to society. They don't have to be useless. They should not be useless. Art makes people, citizens, useless. So that's the problem with art, according to Plato. So this utilitarian approach is very, very important throughout his writing. And law abiding, citizens, they have to be disciplined. They have to obey the laws of the land. So it's very important. It is very important for them to get trained properly. And here comes the most important notion of body-mind dualism. So mind has to be properly disciplined, and unfortunately, art corrupts human mind. And body is the least important thing according to Plato. Body is the least valuable thing because it is impermanent. Body is impermanent, and body always seeks pleasure, right? And whereas mind is very, very important. And unfortunately, mind receives impressions from external world, and here art plays a major role. And unfortunately, according to Plato, art corrupts human mind, and it creates a world of illusion, and art misguides citizens of his republic. Therefore, he stood for the expulsion of artists from his republic, right? So if you take all these things closely, there are so many points of disagreements. So we can look at some important loopholes in his ideas later. So coming to so the metaphor of education, coming to that top section, there is metaphor of education. So this is very interesting because Plato introduced a metaphor, a very important metaphor, metaphor of education, and it is popularly known as the cave image, cave metaphor. So he considered world as a dark cave. Okay, so world as a dark cave, and human beings, they are trapped inside the dark cave. And if somebody moves closer to the opening of the cave, if somebody happens to get out of the cave, but that person can see light, broad daylight. So once that such a person sees the broad daylight, that person's eyes will be blinded for a moment. Okay. So here, according to Plato, daylight stands for reason and realm of ideas. Okay. So human beings who are trapped in the cave of darkness can be salvaged by only one group of people, that is philosophy. So only a philosopher who is an enlightened person, a philosopher who is rational and enlightened, can save humanity from darkness to broad daylight. So that cave metaphor is important for us, right? Though it is not popularly discussed as compared to his theory of ideas. So the last point is utilitarianism. I have already mentioned the idea utilitarianism. He was essentially a utilitarian philosopher. And you all know his famous statement, poetry is useless. Okay. So how he evaluates, how he judges a poem, how he judges a poet. A poet is useless. Poetry is useless for ideal republic. So artists, they, on the whole, in a general way, artists, they are useless for society. Right? And now we come to the backbone of his contribution as a critic, that is his theory of ideas. This is slightly confusing. So I shall try to explain it in a simple way. Right? Art is choice or thrice removed from reality. It is a mere pastime, I quote Plato, which keeps away people from reality by creating illusion and imperfect copies. Okay, you can see choice or thrice, two words. In some books, we come across a statement, according to Plato, art is choice removed from reality. Whereas in some other books, we come across the statement by Plato, art is thrice removed from reality. And obviously, those who read these two approaches, they are confused, right? Anyway, I shall explain both. But before that, look at the second part of that statement. It is a mere pastime. Art is a mere pastime. That means it is useless. There is no use for art. And art keeps away people from reality. Again, yes, art keeps away people from reality, from truth, by creating illusion and imperfect copies. Okay, and now let's see what he says about his idea. Right? According to Plato, art is imitation. It is most important notion, mimesis. Okay. Art is not original. It is a copy. Okay. Art is imitation. Let's see how art is removed from truth and reality. And if you look at the first component, there is ideal form, and within brackets real, right? So reality exists as idea, right? Ideal form, that is real. Okay. Example, bird. Real bird exists in the world of ideas. And I have purposefully put some dots to make a difference between the first one and the second part. And look at the first component, artist's mental framing of the bird. If you take bird as an example, and bird in the world of ideas, that's a real bird. If at all we can call it a real, that itself it can be questioned according to post-structuralist, right? So bird exists, real bird exists in the world of ideas. And the first one, artist's mental framing of the bed. The carpenter, suppose if a carpenter wants to make a bed, and before making the material bed, that is second one, material bed, before making the bed, the carpenter may design a bed in his mind, and that is his mental framing of the bed. Okay, that is the first phase, right? Which is away from the ideal form of bed, right? Secondly, the material bed, like carpenter, that is also unreal, like the mental framing of the bed by the carpenter, right? And look at the third stage. If an artist wants to paint the picture of the bed, right? So painting of bed by artist, that's also unreal. That's also a copy, but that is removed from reality. So therefore art is a deception, and it is twice or thrice removed from reality. So reality is somewhere away from us. That's the point. And art takes us far away from reality. So this one, and this the first, the second stage, third and fourth one. And look at the three stages, and this is equally important. Mental framing. So if art is thrice removed from reality, then this two, and it is twice removed from reality, this two, and if it is thrice removed from reality, take these three phases. Okay, this is his theory of ideas in a nutshell. Then let's move on to Plato's views on poetry. Poetry is a form of art, so therefore art is imitation. Poetry is an act of imitation. Okay. Being a part of the art, poetry is also imitation and unreal, right? And it is useless also. And according to Plato, poetry appeals to emotions and not intellect. And you can see he evaluates the merit of something with the touchstone of reason. So he uses reason as a touchstone to arrive at a conclusion regarding the relative merits and demerits of art. Right? And poetry fails to mold character. So Plato was very strict that art should mold character. Art is basically useless, but good art should mold human character. Right? Poetry fails to, according to poetry, fails to mold character. It is immoral. Again, from his point of view, it is immoral and therefore useless. Right? And the purpose of good poetry. Okay, however, we can accept some good poets. We can accept some good writers, but with a condition. What's the condition of Plato? The purpose of good poetry is to instruct and to teach. That's very important. Teaching only. The pleasure of art is looked down upon. That's very, very important. And he gives importance only to instruction and teaching. And when we come to Aristotle, and according to Aristotle, the primary aim of art is to give pleasure. Okay, Plato completely ignores the aesthetic beauty of a work. And a good poem should teach justice, goodness, and beauty. That's a view of Plato. Okay, he attacks poetry on different grounds, on mainly 4 grounds. The first ground is moral ground. And according to Plato, poetry, poem essentially, if, if we take a poem as a single unit, a poem spreads lies, right? It spreads lies about gods and heroes, right? And here I request you to remember Stephen Gosson. Gosson was a great admirer of Plato, and his work full of abuse. He attacked poetry and poets by calling poets, I quote, enemies to virtue. So poets are enemies to virtue, according to Stephen Gosson. So Plato, after introducing certain ideas, Plato's ideas were popularized by many followers of Plato, and I should say that they have done so much damage to our reading of texts that we can explain, that we can see later, right? So one is the moral aspect. Second one is emotional aspect. So according to Plato, art is immoral and it is emotional in the sense that there is no restraint on feelings of people, and there is no emotional restraint. Okay, I quote Plato: "They feed and water the passions instead of drying them up and let them roam." So in Book 10 of Republic, he talks about that. So Plato never ever wanted us to be over emotional. So he was against emotions, and that's why he strongly opposed the emotional content of art. Right. Thirdly, the intellectual aspect. According to him, art does not make use of reason, and art keeps away people from the world of truth, reality. Art creates what we call maya or emotion. Therefore, it is useless. Okay, it doesn't intellectually stimulate people. Right? Whereas it concaves the emotions of people. And the fourth one is the utilitarian dimension of poetry. Yes, poet is useless for society, for republic, and therefore artists should be banished from ideal republic. Okay, so the utilitarian function of art, according to Plato, art is useless. So whereas when we come to Aristotle, let me make a comparison. When we come to Aristotle, according to Aristotle, art is not useless. Art is useful. Drama is useful. Poetry is useful because it has a therapeutic effect on the minds of the people who enjoy. So that's why Aristotle introduced the notion of catharsis. So good art has a therapeutic use. So here we should appreciate Aristotle to speak against his own teacher, Plato. So he was being practical in the sense that he strongly supported the utility of good art. And about his views on drama. Drama is imitation. Drama being a part of art, drama is imitation, and it is showing. Okay, instead of telling, it is showing. And Plato used the word diegenesis. So diegenesis, telling. And here, again, we can draw a comparison with Stephen Gosson. And according to Stephen Gosson, drama, I quote, is popular debauchery. Drama makes people effeminate. appeals to baser emotions. It makes people effeminate. It affects the moral fiber of people. Therefore, it is absolutely useless. Okay. Now, let's come to the concluding part. Having listened to the use of Plato, obviously we can agree with some of his things. At the same time, we should criticize the critic. So we should make use of our freedom to criticize the critic, whoever it is. Right. And let's see some of the important merits of Plato's contribution as a critic. The first important point is, I would say that he was a milestone critic. He was a milestone critic in the sense that he triggered certain ideas which were taken up by subsequent critics. At the beginning, I mentioned this point. So there was a milestone critic who influenced later critics. Right. I'll just give an example, especially a definition of art. According to Plato, art is the imitation. So the mimetic aspect of art was taken up by later critics. I take you to different centuries. Aristotle, let it be Aristotle, let it be Horace in Ars Poetica, let it be Longinus in On the Sublime, let it be Philip Sidney, let it be John Dryden, let it be Dr. Johnson, let it be some other critics. So many critics, they borrowed this idea, art as imitation, right? And remember, Plato was the first critic who introduced this notion, that is, art is imitation. To give another example, the purpose of art. We talked about triggering certain ideas of Plato by subsequent critics. So what is the purpose of art, or what is the purpose of poetry, or what is the purpose of drama? And according to Plato, the one and only purpose of art is to teach and inspire. But luckily, so many critics who followed Plato totally disagreed. The first person who disagreed with Plato was his own student, Aristotle. According to Aristotle, no. Giving pleasure is the primary purpose of art. And you can see so many critics across ages. They debated this notion. What should be the purpose of art? Should art give primacy to instruction? Should a good art give primacy to aesthetic pleasure? Right. So the debate continued, and finally Coleridge, he put a full stop to the debate in his work by Graphia Literaria, by claiming that the primary duty or primary purpose of a good piece of art is to give pleasure to readers or viewers. Right? And so many people before Coleridge, they debated this work, Dr. Johnson, etc. Right? Another important contribution of Plato is the distinction he made between fine arts and useful arts. So, in fact, he was the first critic to make such a distinction between fine arts and useful arts. So, in that sense, he is very, very important. And another point is, he talked about poetry as inspiration. The poet as a divinely inspired being. That means indirectly we can read that poet can take us to a higher level of enjoyment, that is ecstasy, right? And subsequently, after Plato, we can see Longinus in his work on the sublime. He talks about the sublimity of a good work. A good work can take you to a higher level of enjoyment, the world of ecstasy, the world of bliss, right? I borrow the concept by Longinus, that is transport. A great work can transport the reader to a higher plane of enjoyment. Let me make an interesting connection with Sri Aurobindo. Aurobindo, in his critical work, The Future Poetry, he talks about poetry as divine ananda. He called Aurobindo divine ananda. So a good uh, piece of work gives you ananda, that is bliss and ecstasy. So that's a very interesting point. But Plato, in a way, he was contradicting himself. In his work 𝐿, he talks about poetic inspiration. The Republic, he totally negates uh, art as a whole. Right? So it's a contradiction within Plato. Right? Uh, and another important point is Plato was the first critic to talk about the organic unity of a work. Organic unity of a work. So according to him, a good work is just like a living organism. Okay, there has to be totality, there has to be unity within the human body, right? So a good piece of work should have organic unity. And after Plato, Aristotle talked about the unity of structure, beginning, middle, and end, right? So this Wordsworth talked about organic unity. So did Coleridge. Okay, so the notion of organic unity was proposed by Plato before all others. So that's also very, very important, right? Now let's come to some of his ideas which we cannot agree, right? So we may not agree with some of the views of Plato. First important thing is, wasn't he so idealistic? He was an ideal philosopher. He talked about ideal republic. World should be a part of his ideal society. So he was being too idealistic in the sense that he totally neglected the aesthetic dimension of art, the utility of art. Okay. Art has so many positive dimensions, positive aspects, and I um, I quote Sir Philip Sidney. According to Philip Sidney, a good piece of work is conducive to virtuous action. A good piece of work can lead people to good action. Wordsworth also talked about the purpose of a good work. A good work can make a person a better one. Okay, right. So did Dr. Johnson, conducive to virtuous action. So this person totally neglected the beauty of the aesthetic beauty of a work. So let's think about different works. So we have learned so much from the poems of, for example, I'll just give a couple of examples. Just to think about the poem of Robert Frost. So we have learned so much philosophy from his poems, especially stopping by books, and that famous poem, The Road Not Taken. And who can ignore the contribution of Shakespeare as a writer? From his plays, he talked about human frailty. It taught us about the different stages of man, right? So the great writers, they are geniuses. They, they, they teach us philosophy over generations. So the purpose of a good painting or a good film, everybody talks about, Satyajit Ray's Father Panchali. So immortal pieces of art, they remain immortal. They teach us so many values. Uh, so we can learn so much from um, great pieces of art. So totally ignoring that portion is too idealistic. So I think Plato has failed in overlooking the positive side of a good piece of work. Right? And now, so we have to agree to disagree with Plato regarding his idea that art is useless. So let's say that art is useless. Art is not useless; it is useful. Art can be uh, useful. I don't claim that all pieces of art are useful, but there are good works. And lastly, the point, damaging and destructive criticism of art. So Plato was an authority. So nobody had courage to question his. And I'm really glad that Aristotle did question two or three uh, ideas propounded by Plato. One, according to Plato, art is useless, and Aristotle said no, art is useful because art can give us pleasure, aesthetic pleasure. And according to Plato, art is a copy, blind imitation. According to Aristotle, art is a creative process. So he added the aspect of creativity into it. Plato was idealist and Aristotle was a realist. So the person who pronounced certain bold statements remained unquestioned for a while. Right? And in that sense, he had a damaging and destructive role in the criticism of art for a certain period of time, because there were so many followers of Plato across generations who vociferously supported his views, including Stephen Gossen. And we know that the form apologies or defenses. So apologies or defenses were written to bring back the glory of art. So that's why Sir Philip Sidney had to write an apology to attack Stephen Gossen, right? And Shelley had to write a defense to attack Thomas Love Peacock. To reread or to reinstate, they had to write defenses and apologies to reinstate the merit of a work. So it is taking the route to the extreme level if we say that art is used. So to sum it up, so when we analyze Plato, this statement by Atkins is very important. He made later criticism possible. Plato was a starting point, and he made later criticism possible. So there are so many who supported him, and there are so many who opposed him. So he started the debate, and it was the beginning, and he was a crucial philosopher, crucial critic. That's what we have to understand about Plato. And to sum it up, I would say that the most important aspect of this criticism is, of course, this theory of ideas and mimesis. And thank you so much for your patient listening. Thank you. So now it's time for questions. So we have some time to have discussion. Right.
Okay. So first question is, why does Plato deny admittance to poetry in his Republic?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I have already mentioned, I suppose, in my discussion, my early discussion, he was totally against art. Art appeals to mind. Art pollutes the mind. Art corrupts the mind by creating an illusory world. And he called art as fake. Art is fake. Art is illusion. And art takes people from far away from the real original truth, right? And poetry is a major component of art. Therefore, he was totally against art in general, and he was totally against poetry. And poets, they create illusions. The poet pollutes the minds of people, and poet makes people emotional. And poet, makes people. Poetry makes people emotionally imbalanced, and it corrupts the mind of the people, and it makes people less disciplined. So people, according to Plato, people of the Republic, they have to be restrained. They have to be disciplined in such a way that they have to be useful to society. So to him, Poetry essentially is useless because of its negative uh, negative quality. That is, it totally pollutes the mind of people. And since you have asked the question, let me add one more point. When it comes to 17th century, uh, Sir Philip Sidney attacked Plato because of his poem. And according to Philip Sidney, poetry is not the issue here. The abuse of poetry is the issue. So poetry essentially is useful, but what is wrong is the abuse of poetry. And he takes a dig at Plato by saying that Plato himself was a poet, especially in his work dialogues. So many passages in his work dialogues, they are highly poetic, and Philip Sidney quotes Plato's Ion by introducing that phrase, "Poets are divinely inspired." Okay, so however we can see Plato had an ambivalent view regarding poetry as a whole. We should say that because on the one hand, he strongly opposes art and poetry. At the other end, in some other works such as Ion, he admits that poets are divinely inspired. So it's a somewhat ambivalent stand taken by Plato. But at the same time, I think we should go with the most important statement given by Plato in the public. Poets should be banished from the republic. Okay, please next question.
Okay, thank you for the response, sir.
Yeah.
So next question is in two parts. One is Plato's arguments against literature and the value of Plato's criticism.
Okay, let me take that part. Okay.
Okay.
Plato's arguments against literature. According to him, literature being, an intellectual, Marxist theoreticians use the expression intellectual production. Right? Artists, writers, literature is an intellectual production of society, and literature is produced by a group of writers who have talent, who have creative imagination. And remember, Plato was highly against creative imagination. He was totally against creativity and creative imagination. That's why Aristotle had to strongly disagree with his own teacher. Okay, he gave preference to reason. He gave preference to reason, and very importantly, we have to be very clear about the definition of literature. So Plato did not totally negate other forms of literature such as law. Yeah. Okay. So creative literature. So we have to differentiate between creative literature and literature in general. So literature, he wrote a work laws. Plato wrote a work laws. So philosophy can be literature in a way, right? So Plato was totally against creative literature, I would say, and whereas he did not oppose writings such as philosophy and rhetoric. And second question, please. And very importantly, the touchstone, and very importantly, the touchstone which Plato used to judge the relative merit of literature. That's very important. Reason. So reason was used as a touchstone, not emotion. Please, the second question. The second part.
The second part was how do you comment on value of Plato's criticism?
Yes, I strongly disagree with his comment on value. Yeah. See, once we go through different theories, so we tend to deconstruct. I use the word deconstruct the very notion of values. So whose values? Who makes values? The so-called values put forward by Plato. And who makes values? And remember, at the beginning I mentioned, it was essentially a patriarchal society. So the values which were constructed by Plato was essentially from the standpoint of a group of men, okay, from the standpoint of patriarchy, right? So the values, the gender dimension of values put forward by Plato. So we have to deconstruct that. And who makes values and on whom? Okay, so he was very particular that all people in his ideal republic, should strongly stick to the values of the elite class. That's very important. The gender dimension of values. Secondly, the class dimension of values, and the ruling class values, elite class values. And remember, Plato was born in an aristocratic family. So he is very powerful. Okay, so elite class values should be imposed on all sections of society, including slaves and women. Right. So if we deconstruct the notion of values by Plato, I think it's highly problematic based on these two dimensions, that is class and gender. So we have to disagree with that. That kind of notion put forward by Plato. Right?
Okay, one attendee has asked, what are all the expected questions from this session?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very important. If it is an essay question, if it is in the third section, that is essay, I'll begin with an essay question. You know, what is the contribution of Plato as a critic in the field of literary criticism? That's one possible essay question, which is a plain question. Secondly, if you ask me to give a better question, I would say the notion of imitation in literary criticism across ages. Okay, we can form a question like this. Debate the notion of imitation in literary criticism. So that's a question which is general in nature, which includes not only Plato, which includes other critics also. Plato, Aristotle, Longinus, Horace, all those classical critics, and English critics such as Sir Philip Sidney, Dryden, T.S. Eliot, notion of tradition, and before T.S. Eliot, we have Matthew Arnold. Okay, so one question is general in nature, and the first question was particular in nature. When it comes to paragraph question section, the most important paragraph question is, of course, theory of ideas. Theory of ideas or forms, FORMS, both are same, theory of ideas or forms. Okay. Secondly, critically evaluate Plato's notion of mimesis. That's very important. So mimesis is a very, very important paragraph question. Okay. The third important question I would recommend is make a comparative evaluation of Plato and Aristotle. What are the areas of agreement between Aristotle and Plato? What are the areas of disagreement between Aristotle and Plato? So this is distinguished between Plato and Aristotle, that kind of. So that's a very important question. And sometimes you can expect Plato's cave imagery. So metaphor of cave is very, very important, right? Then as short answer questions, especially in UGC exams, NET exams, I have come across questions such as who wrote the work Phaedrus, or who wrote the work Symposium or Aeon. So in competitive exams, nobody will ask you who wrote Republic. That everybody knows that Plato wrote Republic. It was Plato who wrote Republic. It was Aristotle who wrote Poetics, right? So apart from Republic, you should familiarize yourself with the titles. Okay, I'm not asking you to read other works. Okay, you should familiarize yourself with the titles, other titles of Plato's works. Such as Aeon is very important. Symposium, who wrote Dialogues, Phaedrus, etc., etc. Right. Then another important question could be Hellenic criticism. What are the features of Hellenic criticism? So Hellenic criticism was, to put it simply, it was Greco-Roman criticism. So it was a criticism of ancient Greece and Rome. Right? So you had to talk about Athens. You had to write about the importance of Athens as a seat of learning, and the contribution of philosophers such as Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, contribution of writers such as Horace, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, etc., etc. So that's important. And for short answer question, mind-body dualism, not very important, right? But you can expect that. And you can expect a one-word question such as who introduced or who started, who is the founder of academy? Then who was the tutor of Plato, Socrates? Who was the famous student of Plato, Aristotle? So these are some of the possible questions you can expect for examination.
Okay, thank you for the response, sir. So we have covered up all the questions.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Rajesh, sir, for the wonderful sessions. We can wind up the session now. Thank you all the attendees.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.